Making disciples is the primary mission of the church, and God uses the spiritual disciplines to transform us to be like Jesus. This week, we're talking about disciple making, which includes disadvantaging ourselves to understand others and bridge divides in the church like race to bring reconciliation. And I'm talking about that with my new friend, Reverend Esau Vance, pastor at Mount Olive Pentecostal Church in Worcester. We got to meet each other through a mutual friend, Tom Sparling. And so, Esau, thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
And so now I was going to start asking you about your story, but the whole episode really is meant to be about your story. So I'm going to skip over that and really just point out that you're a pastor in Worcester now, but you didn't grow up in Worcester. Can you tell us a little about where you grew up and what that was like?
Okay. I was born and raised in the state of Mississippi. Born in Indianola, Mississippi. My parents later moved to Sunflower, Mississippi, where they moved to a plantation, and we was raised up on the plantation where we spend most of our lives.
And so this is in the Delta, if I remember right.
It is Mississippi Delta.
Okay, and for folks who may not know Mississippi well, that's the poorest area of the Delta, or of Mississippi,
yes.
Sorry. And so this would be about, when are we talking about? This is the 50s-ish?
Yes, into the 60s. Yeah, starting back in 50. By the way, the Delta is flat land, and either side to the north towards Memphis or to the south towards Jackson, Mississippi, you get into hilly and some, you may say, mountain area.
Okay.
But we lived in the flatland Delta.
So you're deep in the South in the 50s. So that's the Jim Crow South at that point. And so growing up there, what stands out in your memory about what it was like? There's distinctions being made for sure. And so what stood out for you as you think back to that time?
Well, it was deeply segregated, throughout the South. And of course, the part where I lived, my parents lived, fit that description. We grew up as I stated, on a cotton plantation where we would get up early in the morning to go into the fields in the spring to chop cotton, in the fall to pick cotton. Our school year was fit around this plantation, meaning that we would have to go to the cotton fields in the morning before we actually went off to the school about 8:30. And the hours for school in the morning and afternoon was situated so that we would spend more time in the field. So we would get out of the field probably get out of school probably around 2, and we would spend the rest of the day till 6 or 7, whenever it got sort of dark, in the field. And we did this throughout the spring and fall, both for chopping and picking cotton.
And so, and what time are you getting out in the field in the morning? When does that start?
We call it from CAE, from the time that you can see to the time you couldn't leave in the afternoon. So I would say 6 o'clock, 5 or 6 o'clock, and you'd probably be out there sometimes 6:30 or 7.
Wow.
So it's how dark you got.
And how old are you when you're doing this?
The average child would be taught how to work in the plantation at about age 6, and you stay there too. And adult, if you remained on the plantation that long with your parents, and sometimes, of course.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I said sometimes you would go out and get married and start your own family and remain on a plantation.
And so you've used that term plantation a few times. I think a lot of us have the notion that, well, once the Civil War is over and slavery is over, plantations are over, but that's not the case.
That was not the case. No, we were sharecroppers. And if you know the nature of sharecropper, it's basically some type of maybe modern slavery. You did not get paid directly on a weekly, monthly basis for the hours that you spend there. You would you would chop the cotton in the spring, and you're disappearing, Charles. Okay, we would chop cotton in the spring. Sometime during the summer, it would get really hot, and you sort of leave because the cotton is growing, then getting ready to harvest in the fall. So we would chop and pick cotton in the fall.
And I've read a lot of stories about sharecropping where the way it's working is the plantation owner is renting their land to you, and they're advancing you money for seed and maybe living expenses.
Yes.
And all that stuff, and you have to repay that back out of the harvest.
Okay, that was probably done for, in some cases, in a sort of indirect way or hidden. For instance, the plantation owner that we lived on his plantation, we did not rent the land. We lived on the land. We did not have to pay rent per se. Okay. He would take care of planting the seed, buying the seeds, and also had tractor drivers who would plant the seeds. And we had to chop the cotton and pick it. At the end of the year, sometime November timeframe, if we were all done with the crops, what he would do is, they called it settlement, which means at the end of the year, he would meet with my father and say how many bales of cotton we did that year, and how much money that earned or came to, that he has the books on. Now, we have no receipts for anything. It was his word for it. And so he would tell my father how much expense that he had to put out for the year for us to grow that crop. And he would tell him what was left as a settlement for us. And whatever he said was what we had to go with.
And because you're not allowed to ask, well, let me see the books. I want you to prove that to me.
That was not a question you was going to ask.
Yeah. And so and because there'd be physical danger to you and your family if you asked that kind of a question.
Yeah, and again, it was just something that it was taboo. Yeah. Throughout that plantation system.
And so that's kind of a daily routine for you in your childhood. But at some point, you get involved with the civil rights movement in your teenage years. How does that happen?
Well, for me, it started with we call them Freedom Riders in early 60s, 61, came down after the 5 years or so after the bus boycott down in Alabama. Yeah. And so right around 60, 61, it hit our state of Mississippi. And there was Freedom Riders, we call them, that came down from all across the country, primarily the north, northeast, and even California out west. They came to the Delta, Mississippi, and all over the South, Alabama, Arkansas, and all those places. And they started challenging some of the laws that was on the state books, some of the practices that Black was being put through, and primarily the laws that was illegal at the federal level, but they was okay at the state level. So they start challenging those laws and start getting us involved in campaigning for the right to vote, so we can overturn even more laws. So that the Voter Right Act came around 64, and the Civil Rights Act, I believe, in 65, maybe vice versa. But those two important things that kind of put us on the way, and we start through the civil rights movement, we start having boycotts, sit-ins. Those was methods of fighting back and trying to get the white man to concede and giving us our rights. The dollars that we made, we would refuse to spend them in certain stores if they did not adhere to our rights. And so that was some of the ways that we got started there until we also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, so also in later years, a lot of this stuff was challenged and brought all the way up to the Supreme Court, in Washington, D.C. And we start seeing some release After we got the Voter Right Act, Black people start voting. We got Black people to run for political office at local, state, county, state, and state level, and even tried at the federal level.
And so we're passing things like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act, but at the state level, they're basically, in some places at least, they're ignoring that. And so while we're passing these laws like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, at the state level, they're just ignoring those laws and keeping on the system that they had in place already.
Yeah, it took a while to get those laws abolished through state and legislative activity.
And so, and to do that, the key thing in doing that is harnessing the power of the vote.
Oh, yes,
because
exactly.
as long as I can deny you the vote, right? I can make sure that nobody's going to be in a position of authority to enforce the federal laws that are actually giving you rights.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the first things they contested and fought against, Black people getting the right to vote. We had such thing as poll tax. We had intimidation around the voting places where Blacks was told if they came there to vote, they would have to move off the plantation, or they could even face violence, and they did. So.
Right. Because so what are your parents saying to you? Because I'm guessing your parents are teaching you growing up something about how to coexist in this system. And now you're starting to do things that are dangerous in the system because you're working with the Freedom Riders, you're going out and you're getting people signing petitions and signing up to vote, as I remember.
That's
and
correct.
So how are your parents thinking about this?
So my father was a Baptist minister, and so he had some dealing with the public, but at the same time, he adhered to the protocol of the plantation owner because, that's where we lived on the plantation. That's where he saw a livelihood. And what he did in my case was, I was one of 7 children, so I was one who would actually get away from the plantation, slip off and join the marches and the protests, the sit-in. And eventually, white owners of businesses saw me, and they got the message back to the plantation owner. And he contacted my father and told him that I would have to discontinue my activity with the movement, or I was going to have to move. My father would have to move. But my father never said anything to me about going out. He never said anything to stop me. And I saw that as him, in a way, encouraging me to go ahead, move forward. And so I continued to do it. And at some point, the plantation owner did say to my father that you're going to have to get off the plantation and move. At that time, we thought we had no place to go. We thought we had no place to move. But there was a Black plantation owner who had moved north and left her plantation to a few people living there on it, and her house was vacant. And so my father talked to her about it, and he said, she told him that we could move in that house rent-free, just keep the place up and stay there as long as we want to. And we lived there for years. We was able to live there for years free. Nobody was harassing my father anymore, and he went out and made money to take care of him and my mom. But by that time, some of the children, my sister and brother, had started migrating north. And so it wasn't too devastating or bad for them in terms of making a living at that point. I was still there. I was the last one to leave this off because of my involvement in the civil rights movement.
And so there's a lot in that, right? So your housing is being threatened, and of course we know other stories of people who had even worse things happen because they're getting involved with the Freedom Riders,
right?
And so your father is not telling you at the time that your housing is being threatened, so which is basically giving you permission to continue on with your work, but he knows there's risk, and so he's taking a risk, and God provides housing for you.
Yes, exactly.
Through this lady, which is a beautiful story. And so you're able to move. And so now the threat of housing is removed, but there's other threats that could be leveled against you and your family.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so now I remember you telling me that you were going to other plantations during the day, at least part of your
Yes.
work, to get people
Yes.
to sign petitions or sign up to vote.
Yes.
And so are the plantation owners letting you on their property to do that?
No, that was not done freely. We had to sneak in and try to stay hidden as much as we could when we go to someone's house. Sometimes we would do it, although it was quite dangerous. Sometimes we would do it dusk dark, early night, but no, they would not give you permission to do that. And as a matter of fact, I was even chased a couple of times in different, and not even in my own town. I was chased in another town because and this was not plantation. This was actually canvassing. Can't hear you again.
Yeah.
This was actually passing out flyers and leaflets in another town, which was about 10, 12 miles from where I live. And the police it wasn't just after me, but it was after the whole group who was canvassing that evening in that town. And I recall running down the street and trying to find a place to hide. And I managed to go to a house that had been screen punched in. And I didn't knock on the screen door. I just opened it, and it opened. I said, thank God. And I hid on the porch until the police left that area looking for myself and other individuals. Then I finally found the group that I was with later on that day.
Now, if they had caught you, what would they have done, do you think?
Well, if they was rogue cops or people, I could have gotten beaten. Some did. Or it could have been put in jail for violating their mandate not to be doing it. They would say you don't have a permit to do it.
Okay. And you can't get a permit to do it, right? So
no, you're not going to get one.
Right. So it's a nice setup.
We couldn't wait for the permit.
Yeah. And so you're working with the Freedom Riders and you're canvassing, and it's risky to you. Now, when we're younger, we think about risk differently, but you must have been sensitive to that risk of, prison or a beating or worse. And so what are you just shutting that out of your mind, or are you just overcoming it, or how are you dealing with legitimate fear, I would assume?
Yeah, we lived in fear every day that we went out into the streets, every evening, every night. But we would march and sing songs that would encourage us and keep us, as you may say, brave and moving forward. Like, I'm not going to let anybody turn me around. I'm going to keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom lane. And there was many songs we would sing like that would keep us moving forward. We understood the reality, but where we needed to get to was more important. It was well worth the danger. So we kept pushing forward.
And so we could spend hours talking about your story because it's fascinating to me. And I just think you're one of the most courageous people I know. And I know I embarrass you when I say that, but I still say it. But would you? What's a story? Maybe you just shared one story. What's another story or two that really stand out in your minds of the work you are doing?
It was sort of getting towards the end of the height of the civil rights movement in '68, on the 4th of April, when I got the news that Dr. King had got assassinated. It was like several tons of brick had been dropped on all of the Black people heads in the South. I wouldn't just say the state of Mississippi, I would say in the South, and even to an extent, probably the North. But I would say that was the greatest impact upon my life.
And how did you react to it? Right. I mean, I know everybody grieved. Well, not everybody, in fairness, but decent people are grieving the assassination.
Yeah.
How is it impacting you and the direction of your life beyond the grief?
Okay, so after that, many of us, meaning the freedom riders, the civil rights workers all across the South, we actually kind of lost hope in our destiny, in our dreams. Some of us, it was short-lived, after we got through the sadness. Others it was long-lived, but it was short-lived in the sense that for me, well, many of us became very, how do you call it? Well, we became violent in a sense. And we lost the hope. Some of us gave up for a while on the dream of Dr. King of nonviolent and passive resistance. And we stated that many of our no idea that we would no longer turn the other cheek. And I'm not happy about the statement that I'm about to make, but for a while, we organized a Black Panthers movement in our city and in our county, of which I became the chairperson of it.
So some people react to Dr. King's assassination by walking away from the movement or demotivated. Other people start to feel that violence is the only answer. That's the only way we'll secure our rights.
Exactly.
And the Black Panthers are at the forefront of that, and you get involved with them. And so what happens in your time with the Black Panthers?
Well, actually through our organization and me being the chairperson, we would we put plans together to fight back in a violent way and even to attack the homes of some of those the white that we knew had perpetrated violence upon us. And we would go and scope out their homes and talk about, getting rid of them and their family. And we had in our organization, we had some who had been in the army and stuff, could make bombs and all that. So we had that resource. And the only thing I needed to do was to make the call, to give the go ahead. And I want to say that I thank God that he did not allow me to do it, because that group was ready to move forward.
Yeah.
But God had a different plan for my life, because had that happened, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today, or I would have probably died in prison, or they would have killed me. So that did not happen. And I thank God to this day that it did not happen.
And so they're looking to you as the leader to make the call to say, okay, let's go after some of these people. And
Exactly.
You decide, I'm just not doing that. God got in your way in a good way.
It was
right?
God. It wasn't me. It was God. He wouldn't allow me to give the go ahead.
That's great. And so then what happens then? So do you leave the Black Panthers?
Yes. Shortly after that, now you're coming into 2 years later, around 1970, things start coming down. And I really, at that point, start focusing on, I got married and I started focusing on family. And I start thinking about a life that did not include the South at that point. So I don't know how you say it. I don't know. Maybe I felt that some gains had been made in the South. Some had been lost, and what do we do now? And so I felt that I needed to go relocate, finish my schooling, get a job, and raise my family.
Okay. And so you come up to visit. So all your siblings have left the South at this point.
Everyone except my mom and dad.
Okay. And so how do you wind up in Worcester?
Okay. It was in June of 1974. I actually came up, bought my mom, my wife, and at that point we had 2 children. And I brought them up for vacation, and spent the time with my sister, who was at Mount Olive Pentecostal Church. We went to a Bible study on Wednesday night. And I met the pastor afterwards, had an opportunity to speak with him. And it was like meeting him was like meeting Jesus. It was heaven. And those people at the church, they're the same today, but they were so warm-hearted and friendly and just all you would want. It was just a different lifestyle and different from the South that I knew. And so I said to the pastor that that was in June. I said, I'll be back in 3 months and I'm going to come up here and give my life to Christ and get saved. And I say, he probably said, sure you will. You know, he didn't say that to me. but in sure enough, 3 months later in September, I was back. I had returned here, and my family and I. And then on a Saturday, we arrived in, well, actually, let me just back up a little bit. On our way back here, I had a car that was, I should never have left the South End. It was, I said it was, we was tell the people at the service station to check the oil. No, fill it with gas, but check the oil. No, fill it with oil, but check the gas.
Yeah.
Because it was just, the car was not worthy to be out there. But anyway, that God brought us up in that car that was used more oil than gas. And we didn't have, I had $75 when I left Mississippi, and that was it, you know. And so we made it to, there was no money for hotels on the road, so we had to sleep in the car all the way. On a Saturday night, I got to New York, where I had a sister. I had a sister living in New York, and we made it to her house. And I had a brother who also lived in New York with her at that time, was coming to Worcester that same night. And I could not drive my car any further. I had to leave it at my sister's house in New York, came to Massachusetts, got a job, went back a few weeks later and got my car. And God just put all this together, made the connection that my brother was coming here the same night that I arrived in New York and had no means to get to Worcester. Yeah. But we got here and I got a job and I got saved on a Sunday morning doing what we call the testimony service at Mount Olive Pentecostal Church. And the rest is somewhat history. We been there ever since 1974, and found everybody there to be warm-hearted, caring people. They're just down-to-earth people. We didn't have to worry about the three-piece suit. We could, we could wear our jeans if that's all we had, and our flannel shirt to church. And anybody who wanted to wear their three-piece suit could wear it. It was okay, you know. And so then I became, 2 years later, after getting saved, I became a deacon. I was ordained a deacon by the pastor 2 years later in 76. A few years later, I think in 89, I became the chairperson of the deacon board. After the senior deacon there died, I became the chairman of the deacon board. And I had another 10 or 15 position in the church. And then in 2011, I became the assistant pastor. Okay. And then when the senior pastor at that time retired in 2012, I was elected as the pastor in 2013 in January. And that's where we are. So
this is your 10th year anniversary.
Yes, it is.
Congratulations.
Thank you. January the 5th.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's almost like God had a plan in all of this.
Well, he did. And I say that's why he did not allow me to make any calls with regards to the Black Panthers, anything that was violent and that could mess up God's destiny and pass for my life and my family life. He did not allow it.
Yeah. We pray a lot for God to do something in our lives. Sometimes we need to be focused on God, just stop me from doing things.
That's it.
Because there's been stupid things in my life too. That's like, this could have gone really, really wrong.
And he stopped. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, one of the reasons I wanted you to share your stories, I think your life story is amazing. But we have so many issues of race in our society. We have so many issues of race in the church. And so with just a few minutes left, would you just share maybe a little bit about what's on your heart and mind, or advice or words of wisdom you might have for us about where do we go from here?
Well, one of the last thing I had on my paper here was that all of those all that I was involved in the South, I thought I could do it, and we could do it without Christ. We would move ahead, and we would say what we're going to do. We try to execute our plans, And, we would pray sometimes, but Christ wasn't really, he was with us, but we weren't walking with Christ. Let me say it like that.
Yeah.
And so I would say that whatever we're going to do, even with the race issue, we have to involve Christ. Prayer, I think, is the answer. We do have to work, because prayer without faith without works is dead. So we have to learn how to treat one another. We cannot, as a race of Black people, hold white responsible or hold them, try to fight against them for what their foreparents did in the past. We have to move forward with God and let him chart our destiny moving forward. And it all must be based on his word. Go back to the word. What does he say in his word? Live it, do it. And I think we're going to be all right. Will all of our challenges go away? No. But we're going to be all right.
Esau, thank you so much for taking time today. Thank you for your ministry, but thank you for the privilege of letting us look into your life a little bit and share your story and understand you better. I'm really grateful to you. I'm grateful for your ministry.
You're welcome. God bless.
Thanks. Thanks so much. And I'd like to thank our producer, Jess Mangano, and listeners like you. This program is created by Vision New England, which accelerates evangelism by helping churches to make disciples, do justice, and foster unity.
Can't hear you.
So people want to know Jesus and be transformed. You can find more resources and donate at visionnew.england.org. This program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide. Join us next Sunday.